that feel good?
That is
Christmas is upon us. They're putting decorations up there. Rachel is wearing Christmas red. You're still stuck, Pete, in Thanksgiving with Thanksgiving type, but that's
still in the
okay.
glow.
You'll come around.
still in the after Thanksgiving glow. He's still eating his
Still leftovers. It's still football. There was some great football yesterday. There was a football score, 74-72.
Crazy.
Texas A&M and LSU. Minnesota Gophers beat your Wisconsin Badgers. I don't know if they're your Wisconsin Badgers or not,
yes,
but you're going to own them.
We're giving them to you.
We're giving them to you. So, and a lot of great football today as well. My Vikings take on the Packers on Sunday Night Football. So, I mean, it's all kind of the Thanksgiving glow. Monday will be Christmas time.
Well, and Monday also will bring a lot of news, as we have been pointing out all morning long, and we have confirmed the caravan and the Tijuana-San Diego border will amass in just a few hours in an attempt to peacefully illegally cross at the port of entry there. The administration, the president clearly making a point that he is going to bring everything in terms of resource and rhetoric to stop this sort of behavior. It will be a first test. The president tweeting this yesterday. Migrants at the southern border will not be allowed into the United States until their claims are individually approved in court. We only will allow those who come into our country legally. Other than that, our very strong policy is catch and detain, no releasing into the U.S. All will stay in Mexico. If for any reason it becomes necessary, we will close our southern border. There is no way that the United States will, after decades of abuse, put up with this costly and dangerous situation anymore. And I can add to it, after I spend time with you today, I will go back there and continue to bring you the story.
That's right. There's a group called Pueblos Sin Fronteras, which means people with no borders, that is organizing this march to the border. They say they're going to carry signs. They say they don't want to be violent, but they are saying that they're going to ask to open the gates. They very much believe that they should be allowed in. The president saying he has an arrangement, wants the asylum seekers to stay on the Mexican side of the border and wait for their court date. What people may not know, and is now coming to light, I think since Donald Trump has come into office, is that we have a catch and release policy in this country where we allow asylum seekers to come to our side of the border, but our courts are overflowing and backlogged. And so we say, listen, I know you're here. We got your asylum claim. We're going to look at it when you come back in a few years for your court date, which, of course, people never do.
Yeah, this new potential arrangement, it's not a deal that's been formally struck. It might be a win-win in that the U.S. could increase the number of asylum requests it does at these ports per day substantially, up to 200 to 300. In exchange, the Mexican government would agree to keep the migrants in Mexico during the application process. So in that sense, the process goes faster for those who do it legally. And at the same time, we don't have the catch and release problem here. Griff, you've reported all morning. It could be as early as this morning that a group goes from that soccer stadium in Tijuana. Some of the organizers have said they may do that. They say it's going to be peaceful. It's still illegal. The question is, could it turn violent? How many will there be? And what's sort of the feel? And how does the Border Patrol and the military there deal with it? I'm sure they have standard operating procedures at this point.
That's right. And we
had still a lot of uncertainty.
And they said they've been preparing. I mean, we've had people from the Border Patrol on today.
Deputy Commissioner Perez said.
That's right. And he said, we've been preparing for this.
They have, but you know, this is the first test when, as you point out, Pete, they will say, listen, we're not going to wait in line for asylum. We're not going to play by your rules. We're coming and we're coming now. We'll find out what happens. You know, to your point, Pete, it is interesting, too, as a cooperation between the administration and the incoming Mexican government is really significant because the incoming president, Lopez Obrador, is a left-leaning politician, and he's very pro-immigrant, but yet he's certainly at least acknowledging in his possible cooperation that this is a big deal and both sides of the border have skin in the game.
It's something they've looked away from for a long time and seen as America's problem, and this president has put it on the agenda for them to address it one way or the other. And one way or the other, something's likely going to happen today in that showdown. We had Robert Perez, he's the Border Patrol acting commissioner, on the program earlier. He's right in the middle of this. He talked about the nature of this caravan. Listen.
This caravan and this phenomenon and how it's manifested itself is absolutely unique to anything that we had seen in the past. The mere size, of the group of this caravan, and the violence that has been perpetuated across 2 international borders and throughout the country of Mexico is something that we have taken particular note of and that we are absolutely prepared to deal with if it were to occur.
And I think that's really the answer to the question, why now? He's saying these caravans this caravan is unlike no other, that they're seeing more violence, they're seeing more problems with it, and they're also seeing that there's an endless wave of this. And so it's not just America's problem anymore. This is now Mexico's problem. And the incoming Mexican president, yes, he ran on a pro-immigrant stance, but he's pro-migrant stance, but he's still a populist, and he has to respond to the people. And you are seeing for the first time Mexican citizens protesting in their town, saying, listen,
they want sovereignty too.
We want sovereignty too, and this is a strain on our resources. We don't know how to care for them. So this is now becoming, and I think this might be really what Donald Trump has brought to this that nobody else has done before. He's making this Mexico's problem too.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's forcing a solution.
And if we've seen violence on 2 international borders so far from this migrant caravan, why would we believe we'll see anything different? And to your point, Griff, it was a great one. The first moment will set the tone for future caravans making today. I mean, stay glued to Fox News Channel, because I'm sure we'll be covering if that caravan makes it to the border, we'll be there.
One last thing to watch for, the Tijuana mayor, who said he doesn't want them there. Yeah. We'll see how he reacts. But that's, of course, I've got to get in also some other problems happening in Paris.
That's right.
We are seeing protests all across Paris, just unbelievable scenes because of a rise, a 23% increase in diesel fuel. Began as sort of a green initiative, turned into really a situation between the voters and the population there and the elites.
And Macron responding to the protest saying, quote, "It's a little bit unfair. They see my face when they fill up the gas pump. There is a moral crisis in society. The risk is in the ambient demagoguery. I'm hearing the anger, but I don't want to hear it in demagogic fashion." So he's trying, I actually think he's thinking that this is just about the prices of the oil. But Nigel Farage is saying, no, this is a greater crisis. This is the rural parts of France, the non-elites saying they're tired of being told what to do and having the will of the elites in the country imposed on them.
Yeah, Nigel Farage, who knows a lot about this part of the world, was on our program earlier and spoke to that. Listen.
Emmanuel Macron was voted in. He was the golden boy of the European Union and the globalist movement. He was proof that Brexit and Trump were just short-term aberrations. Everything was going to return to normal. The riots that we saw yesterday are an increasing vote of no confidence in Emmanuel Macron. He is pushing headlong for France to be in the United States of Europe with a European army and all the rest of it. And the French people ultimately don't like that.
Macron, like all the elites, is obsessed with climate change and reducing France's carbon footprint. So he imposed a gas tax. And that diesel tax was, in U.S. terms, 30% per gallon. Imagine a 30% gallon tax on you fueling up. A lot of folks don't like that, feel like it doesn't match their priorities. They do see his face at the gas pump. And that's why 70% of French citizens at this point, according to some polls, don't have any confidence in Emmanuel Macron. Globalism doesn't work that well on your street corner if everything's more expensive and you've got unchecked, unfettered migration in your country as well.
Absolutely.
He's got a real problem on his hands.
And it's an interesting, there's a lot of parallels between our country and what's happening in France, because there's a rural-urban divide. Nigel also talked about how if you are in Paris, it's kind of a pain to have a car. So they don't really care as much about the oil prices as the rural people do, because they actually need their cars to get around. They're feeling the price increase at a level that the urban and elites are not.
Well, and it's interesting, too, that he talks about, this situation in Paris shows no signs of abating anytime soon. And he says, there was a time when guys like Macron just thought, it'll pass. This will be over soon. I've just got to weather it. Not so. Reality's hitting home.
And reality's hitting home in the UK as well. He talked about Brexit. The EU approved a halfway non-Brexit measure that Theresa May is trying to pass. Her own party's rejecting it. The people are rejecting it. She probably won't be prime minister that long. Turns out when the people vote for something, usually they actually want it to happen. And sometimes they vote for someone in Emmanuel Macron and they realize what they're getting and they say, whoa, 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 whoa. That's not really what I signed up for, too.
Right.
So it'll be very interesting to see if this populist movement continues.
Great point.
Because protests in Tijuana and in the UK and in France. All right. Well, all right. We're going to get to some other news right now. We're going to turn to some headlines. The migrant caravan is already sparking violence in the U.S. Border Patrol. Agents are saying that a Honduran man threw rocks trying to stop them from arresting him in Arizona. They say he climbed a tree to avoid getting captured before lighting the tree on fire and throwing the stones. The man was eventually arrested and the fire was put out. A Fox News alert: the United Kingdom is one step closer to leaving the EU. The European Union has just approved a Brexit deal. The agreement sets the terms of Britain's March 2019 departure. Prime Minister Theresa May and EU leaders say this is the only deal possible. The UK Parliament is expected to vote on it before Christmas. We'll have a live report later this hour. And turning to extreme weather, storm systems could disrupt travel plans for millions of people on one of the busiest travel days of the year. A winter storm off the Rockies is threatening to dump up to a foot of snow in parts of the Midwest. Colorado's already covered in snow, and it's causing several accidents. On the East Coast, heavy rain prompted flood warnings in Baltimore. More rain today could impact travel through several northeastern cities. Next, the First family is getting in the holiday spirit. The president and our first lady will light the national Christmas tree on Wednesday. This is the 96th year for the annual tradition. It first started with President Calvin Coolidge in 1923. Those are always beautiful visuals of the tree getting lit in our capital.
Yes.
All right, very cool. All right, still ahead, President Trump threatening to completely close the border as thousands of migrants try to cross into the U.S. A former ICE supervisor and Border Patrol agent says it may be the only solution. He joins us next.
Plus, remember this iconic Christmas scene? Get it? Well, we were going to introduce you on this program to a real-life Clark Griswold. That's his house, who won his own war on Christmas. You want to hear the story? Coming up.
In just a few hours from now, that caravan of migrants planning to march through the San Ysidro border crossing as President Trump warns no one will be allowed entry until claims are approved. Former U.S. Army Captain Jason Piccolo is a former ICE supervisor and Border Patrol agent. He joins us now to react. First, Jason, thank you for your service. You've heard this news. It's going to be a first test of this migrant caravan trying to come across illegally at that port. What do you make of it?
I think it's going to be a mess. I mean, that's one of the busiest land ports we have in the world. And it's also going to disrupt commercial and legitimate pedestrian traffic as well.
Jason, it's hard to imagine what else the Trump administration could do, from manpower to the asylum claims to literally sending the clearest message you can. But do you believe that there is more to be done to solve what is clearly, according to CBP officials, an unprecedented caravan?
Yes, there has to be something done. Now, I mentioned we should have a port court where we could have immigration judges and asylum officers at those ports of entry, but definitely not San Ysidro. That is the busiest port. Now, we could move the traffic east to Tecate, which is only 15 miles from San Diego, and it's a very rural area.
Do you believe there is talk this morning that there is possible cooperation between the Trump administration and the incoming Mexican government, Lopez Obrador, who was a pro-migrant candidate, but now indicating that there could be cooperation? It would involve essentially increasing the number of asylum applications processed at port of entry in exchange for Mexican officials keeping those migrants in Mexico. Do you believe that is significant, and do you think that will help?
That is absolutely significant. We have to have cooperation with Mexico. We also have 10 consulate offices we could work with Mexico in to process those claims down away from the border as well.
Jason, when we look at this caravan, there are others behind it. I spent some time in this original one. Many more have come. The officials say there's some 6,000 possible plus people just in Tijuana now. Do you believe that how this is handled now, this weekend and the coming days, will be a sign as to how the rest of the caravans in these Central American countries will behave?
Yes, definitely. Now, if you look back in the 1990s, there was an influx of hundreds and hundreds of aliens running up the freeways in San Diego, and the government implemented Operation Gatekeeper to stop that flow of traffic. Now, we need to stop this traffic before it gets to the United States, i.e. work with Mexico.
And you, having been a Border Patrol agent and an ICE agent, one of the parts of this story that gets left out, we just had an incident last night at Yuma, Arizona. Agents coming under assault. Are you concerned that this is going to heighten the assaults on our own agents?
Absolutely. Right now, the caravan is filled with migrants, from what we.
Quick headlines. The Coast Guard is investigating after a ferry crashed into a San Francisco ferry terminal. Watch this. The captain says there was a technical failure. 2 people had minor injuries. And Russia wants to rocket to the moon to investigate the U.S. landing in 1969. The head of the Russian space agency appeared to be joking when suggesting it, but conspiracy theorists of NASA's moon mission are common in that country. The Soviet Union abandoned its lunar program in the 70s after 4 experimental moon rockets exploded. Pete?
When post-concussion syndrome forced our next guest to retire from football in 1994, research on football-related head injuries was not a priority. Now, in a new book, Merrill Hodge argues the outcry is missing something critical: the actual science to justify it. Here to explain, former football player and author of the new book, Brainwashed, the bad science behind CTE and the plot to destroy football. Merrill Hodge. Merrill, thank you very much for being here.
It's my pleasure.
You know a lot about being on the field and being on TV as well, so we appreciate you being here. This book cuts against the grain of what everyone assumes, that football's got a concussion problem. You say the science is bad.
Well, yes. Now, this is the reason. You know, listen, I played for a long time, coached for a long time, yes, but I'm coming from really a dad's perspective, and there's a difference between, you know, protocols and treatments versus the CTE pattern that you're hearing about. And that's one thing we got to clear up right away. CTE is a real thing, and I have been across this country into Canada and asked that question: what is it? And every trained neuropathologist, they look at me and they're like, it's a pattern. We don't know what causes it, and we don't know what it causes. So then when I hear that, I'm like, okay, no, how can great minds in this world say we're in an observation state? It's a pattern, but we don't know what causes it. But in the media, I will guarantee you walk around and people have heard that word.
Yes,
what do they think?
Myself included.
Okay, they think,
I think concussions, football.
Right.
Yep.
And that's the other thing. You have people who've got the pattern of CTE who have played sports, and then cases where they have not even played sports. Not been a part of sports, never had a concussion, never had head trauma.
So someone's ignoring the science is what you're saying.
Yeah, they're ignoring all of the science, and then how they're representing the science is the real problem. And that's another thing. I went to the, I've seen the headlines. I go to, experts again. I go, okay, now listen. When I see the headline, I see A. Well, how come when I read it, it says A? What does the science paper say? So that's why I really wrote the book.
Yeah.
Is I took all of the science papers. I had them explained what the science really says versus what we see in the headlines. And it was amazing, the contradiction when you read the science papers, once you understood them, and then what we see in the media. And as I thought it was, I come this from a parent's perspective, is that if I'm a parent and I watch a headline, I can understand how you're running around with your hair on fire, scared to death for your kids. But then when I read what the science really said, I thought really it's important that parents had that information. Even former players or current players, it'd be nice to know the truth of the science, so then I can be more empowered with the information, and whatever choice they make, that's
exactly right. You got a lot of parents out there that want their kids to play football, but they're concerned about those headlines. If you know what the science really is, it empowers you to make the choice you really want to make, as opposed to being scared about it or fear-mongering on it.
And one thing we do in the book too, I think there's a really good job that we don't do a good enough job, is to let parents know the protocols, the treatments, the therapies are out there, how we practice, how exciting sports are, all the options in football: flag, tackle, flex. All of those things are exciting things for sports.
Good stuff. The book is Brainwashed.